Okay. It is. I am early. Hello, two people who are watching. I don't know. Am I supposed to do? No, we should just wait like this. Hello, people, person watching. Can you hear me? Am I the only one here? Can people hear me? Testing. Okay, there's 4 people. While waiting, I guess you guys can send in questions that you would want me to talk about or answer along the lecture. Um, yeah, so at least then I would know when to cover it. Um, Feels weird talking to no one. Ooh. Should I end? Hello, Maruel. I don't know if I pronounced your name properly. I'm assuming you guys can hear me since somebody reacted. Okay, it's all 2:55, so you have 5 minutes to send in your questions. If you don't have any questions, I'll really start at 3. I hope you guys have access to the to the deck. I sent in the deck already, so just check that out. Scroll through it while we're waiting for other people to join us. Yes. We will be back in a while. How do I? Yes, reply speeches. Not responses. Yesterday was responses, so reply speeches. Because we're still in Asian season. Not we're still. We're actually like supposedly midway through Asian season, but everything got cancelled because of coronavirus. So I hope you guys watching there at home are safe and practicing quarantine. Stay at home, drink your vitamins. Yes. Um, I'll try to get a copy of the document. Hello. Wow. Okay, so if you're just logging on now, while we're waiting for 3 o'clock, if you guys have questions that you want me to answer later on, please feel free to message them now so I can insert them and flag them when they're relevant. Yeah. I also hope you guys are doing well again with coronavirus. This is actually a very cool thing. Like I've never been live before. Oh, wow. So you can judge me, whatever. Oh, thanks, Rafi. Si Rafi lang may shoutout. Thank you, Ken Hiro. Thank you, Ethan. Okay, so there's just one more minute. Oh, wow, my countdown. Okay, so it is 3 o'clock and there are 13 people online. Hello everyone, I am Sol Start. Hi, I'm Papat from De La Salle University. Debater as well. And well, when you start retiring, you start judging as well. So that's where I'm at in my life as a debater. Currently, I coach the La Salle Debate Society. So that's part of my experiences as a debater. Um, so yeah, I hope you guys have a copy of the deck so you can follow me while we talk about it. And so, yes. So my lecture today will cover replies and POIs, such odd topics, often overlooked in community and during tournaments. So we will make the most out of it. So I'm also gonna start with case strategies and like an overview of how you get a strategy. I think the reason why I'm gonna start with not I think, like I know the reason why I'm gonna start with strategies is because your POIs and your reply should be based on a good case strategy, the same way like every speech that you do anyway, regardless of your position, will be based on how well your prep is and what your strategy is. So yes. Time is limited, so don't waste your time saying things that don't tie back to the core strategy of your team. If you guys have the PowerPoint, please go to page 5. Okay, so there are two general types of strategies. Actually, they're not really like types because a complete strategy has both. One is your battle cry, and second is defense. So defense mostly are things, your preemptions, things that come out in prep. So if you're a government, for example, you're going to spend a lot of time in prep as well, discussing what opposition is likely going to say and how you're going to end up responding to them. There are obviously different ways that you can respond to something, but in prep, it's usually important to analyze how you can disprove something as well as how you're going to trade it off or prove that it is not important relative to something else that you want to put forward in the debate. So a good defense strategy is one that does not come out as the debate is going on, but one that is already prepared for during prep time. While on the other hand, the battle cry is something that you will keep defending against all odds. So this means like in a motion of this house would ban abortion, or this house would legalize abortion in the Philippines, your battle cry against all odds will be the right of the mother to choose, or the self-determination of the mother or women who choose to opt into an abortion. Um, the goal of setting a battle cry is you will try as much as you can to never lose that and to keep trying to win it at all costs all throughout the debate. In most debates, you are likely to lose if from prime minister down to government whip, the strategy keeps changing. And that's usually because there's no clear battle cry. If the strategy becomes more defensive, that means you're only dealing with the material that comes out from opposition, but not highlighting your existing material. That's because you didn't have a clear battle cry in your prep and in your strategy. So, for example, in the next page, the motion is this house would prevent the media from speculating and reporting on criminals' mental illnesses. A battle cry that you can propose is that it contributes to misunderstanding of mental illness. So this also has an attached goal to it, that the goal is having better discussions about mental illnesses or having more understanding for more people about mental illnesses. So everything that you try to do in the debate and all the speakers will just tie back to this main battle cry that if we allow them to do this, it will lead to a misunderstanding. Not allowing them to do this, therefore, creates better understanding. So there are at different extents that you can prove this. You can prove it in absolutes that absolutely we will get better understanding, or you can prove it marginal that at least there's one less source of bad information or the way that people understand it. So obviously there has to be more analysis to this battle cry, but this generally would be the case line and the main strategy that you guys would wanna probably propose to talk about in your speeches as a team. So ops battle cry on the other hand would probably be media will focus on other characteristics and all that. So there's usually a case line in the debates that I've seen with this motion. So what you can do in prep, it's quite obvious what teams would probably run, at least on baseline in most motions. I think AdCourse set motions having in mind what both sides will run, and it's not impossible for you at prep to try to predict that. So one of the things I think op might run in this motion is media will focus on other characteristics. So defense strategy would be one to say that, well, media does that in status quo. They already focus on other characteristics like gender or your race or your religion. So the harm and the extent of the harm would probably be marginal, but at least so you will tie it back to the original battle cry is at least we reduce the amount of misunderstanding about mental illnesses. So you can also hear another way to defend the battle cry will just be to say, while it is important that people aren't racist, it is also important as a goal that we have better understanding for mental illnesses. Okay? So yun, POIs and replies must always go back to the overall case strategy, dealing with both sides' battle cries and the way that they defend things. So this is really important. You can't just raise a battle cry. I mean, you can't just raise a POI and it comes out of nowhere just because you want to respond to something. It's a waste of time for you, and it's a waste of your rare opportunity to raise a POI. So you must always have a conscious effort of aligning everything to a case strategy. A lot of debate really is partly what happens in the round, but a lot of it is really how you prepare for that round and maximizing your 30 minutes of prep, especially since this is Asians. Okay, let's talk about replies. Also, by the way, if you're just joining us, if you guys have questions along the way, you can just input it to the comments, to the chat area, and I'll definitely be able to read it right away. So if it's relevant at the time, I'll answer it or flag it later on when the topic does come out and when there's time to talk about it. Okay, so I'll answer questions as well at the end, but you can also just input your questions so that I can deal with it right away and so that you don't have to keep waiting on it because you might forget your question, right? I really encourage you guys to ask as many questions as you want. Don't be ashamed. If your question is irrelevant, I'll obviously ignore it. But if it feels relevant to this, then I'll give some attention to it. Yes, I'm talking about the most recent comment. Yes. Okay, so replies. So I'll first start with a few things you need to note as a reply speaker. The first thing is you're not a parrot. So I'd like to think of reply speeches as weighing scales. That's because your role is not to repeat everything that happened in the debate. Hello, your speech is only 4 minutes long, and the debate is probably 7 times 6, 42 minutes long already by the time you have spoken. So there's no way that you'll be able to repeat everything. And repeating everything is just useless because the judge already has their own notes and has a way of keeping track. So repeating everything is a waste of the 4 minutes, and it's the waste of everyone's life. Yes. So what I would propose that you do instead is to be comparative and to use standards. I'll talk about this more later on. So what does that mean about being comparative? So instead of structuring your speech like, oh, these are the things that we said, these are the things why what we said is good. A key way is always to compare. I think most of debate actually is just about being comparative. You don't have to win absolutely. You have to win in a comparison from the opponent and the other side, right? So when you recap or when you summarize what you said, it must be what you said relative to what was also proposed by the other side. You can't just say your thing and accept the judge to accept that. Okay. Use standards. So standards could be things that the judge already uses, like responsiveness, contribution, consistency, depth of analysis. All these types of things are things you can utilize and should utilize as a way of breaking your comparisons and explaining why your comparison matters for that reason. Second, you're not another whip. So if you're just gonna come up and say the same things that your whip said, then just don't come up, right? So what you can do, however, is to be more technical, because I think a lot of the times the whips will deal with more responses and some weighing, but it's really about responding at whip and executing the strategy. So I think what your role as a reply speaker is to be more demonstrative of explaining the technical issue. So one way that people describe reply speakers is you're a biased whip. I mean, a biased adjudicator. And to be a biased adjudicator, you have to have standards. You have to be technical, but you can't just be technical. You can't just say they didn't reply to this idea, or they didn't respond to this, or they didn't have a contribution about this side. You have to also say what you were able to do, how you were able to do it, and how the other side was able to respond to it or was able to deal with it. So I'll talk about that more later as well when I propose structures that you guys can use for reply. Yeah, so one question that people would ask is, what happens if you have to deal with new material from opposition whip or opposition reply? If Because replies are not allowed to do new responses or to insert new material at all, it is then yeah, so it is up to you to deal with new things without having to introduce new things as well. So two ways that you can do this is, one, you can point it out as something new. Like if op reply and op whip comes up with new ideas altogether, then you just say the reason why this part falls out of the debate is because it's new, or it's a new form of analysis. So that's what I mean by being technical. But if you're responding to op whip, it is important that you note that new responses does not mean new material as well, because whips are allowed to have new responses, or else what are they going to say? So the way that you probably would end up dealing with new responses is by weighing them off, which is part again of our defense strategy, or even by highlighting your own battle cry later on. Yes. So the two ways is you point it out as new if it's really new, but the second way is you just illustrate why it doesn't matter in the debate anyway, or it probably misses out something that's more important and more relevant. All right. The third thing to note about replies is it's not useless. A lot of judges would probably stop listening after the whips. I think it is important as a reply, to try to get the attention of your judge again. So one way that you can do this is obviously by contributing to the debate. So if you're just gonna parrot everything and from the start of your speech, you're just gonna repeat what the judge already knows, then the judge is likely to stop listening to you. I do think judges should listen to replies, honestly. Don't be lazy, because they are giving the effort of speaking for 4 more minutes. So I think it's important that as a judge, you also pay attention. The way that you can do this is by highlighting your battle cry, or be explicit with your defense strategy. So this is what we call the meta of the debate. But don't be so obvious about it and say things like, oh, this is the meta of the debate, or this is the meta argument that we're gonna deal with. Like, be more subtle and be more creative. It's 2020, so you can do a lot without having to be all up in your face about the strategies that you're trying to play in the debate. Somebody asked which speakers attempt to seal the win for the team, right? But reply speakers do the same thing. Po. Yeah, actually, all the speakers do attempt to seal the win for their team. That's really just the point of every debater, because you can still seal the win from prime minister already, and then at reply you're just there to as well highlight the main important things. So that's also number three. Last is you're not a liar. A lot of the times, teams speakers come up and say and claim things that obviously did not happen in debate. Like, oh, they had no response to this idea, but they clearly did, right? So I think part of debating is being judicious and giving credit where it is due, but as well as not claiming things that you did not do. So you can't say that, oh, we responded to this idea by saying XYZ, because well, that's new material, but that's also being disingenuous to the teams and not doing your role as a debater. What judges should do is when this happens, they should just ignore new things as a whole. Or if the debater makes claims that we were able to do this, as a judge, you should be keen and note that they did or they didn't do those things, right? But as much as possible as debaters, while we want to win honorably. Yeah. Okay. So don't claim that you did things that you didn't do. So there are other ways of highlighting the things that you were actually able to do without, or highlighting the importance of the things you were able to do. So while you do acknowledge as a whip speaker, as a reply speaker, that there are some things your team wasn't able to do in the round, the strategy should then be to draw away the attention of the judge away from the things you were able to do and show why the things that you were able to do are the most important things that the debaters should have done or should have dealt with in the debate, and what the judge should take note of. All right. So I'll be proposing four structures for reply speeches. So how do I determine which of these structures to use? It's really my gut. Um, as a reply speaker, you need to assess, are we winning or are we losing, and to what extent are we winning and losing? I think that's where a lot of the prep would have mattered, because if in prep you analyze that these are our battle cries and we should win on our battle cries while we must mitigate based on our defense strategy, if by the end of the whip speeches you're unsure about how clearly you're winning your battle cries, then you should adjust the structure of your reply speech based on trying to highlight that. Or if your strategy is to mitigate more because you're trying to insert new responses, but you can't because your reply, then the strategy would probably be more defensive by mitigating or by downplaying the value of a lot of the contribution that comes out from the speakers. Okay. So the first structure that I can propose is by using standards. So your main outline will be, these are the standards you can use to judge the debate, and then that's where you start dealing with it. So three standards that you could probably use are things like contribution, responses, the value and the importance of um, the speech. So it's like creating issues if you're whip, but for reply, it's just more technical, as I said earlier. But it's not enough to be technical. You have to also be demonstrative, right? I think as a good rule of thumb, always start with what the other side said, because it'll give you more time to deal with it. And then you will insert your stuff comparatively. The reason why I think this is important is so that you don't fall into the trap of counter arguing or saying that their thing is untrue because our thing is true, or because our thing is true, therefore their thing is untrue. Because both things could be untrue, right? So I think the reason why you have to deal with material on its own first, which is the our thing or our stuff, and their thing, their stuff, is that it forces you to be able to contribute towards that discussion in itself without muddling the discussion itself. our thing is more important, right? So here we said these major ideas, they only said this much. Honestly, this is not a very good standard, like the amount of contribution. I think a more important way of weighing it would probably be what contribution stood out in terms of survival or in terms of the value and the importance later on. So on value and importance, you could say our thing is more important because it affects the most number of people, or this is how it affects people on like a grander scheme, or their lives, or the rights that are affected, all those types of things. Yes. Another structure that you can use is by clash points or major issues. So this is similar to whipping. Um, but I think the important thing to note here is you must use technical standards inside. So while in the first structure, you start with the standards and the criteria. In this second one, the standards and criteria are inserted. That's why it says like major clash one, their contribution or responses, how it was weighed, right? So you must explicitly say the standard that you're using at this point of the major clash before you go on to another standard, right? Again, it's important to be comparative. That's why I use it starts with their things and then our things, right? You can't just do one or the other in this structure. It's really important that I think another thing that's important here actually is telling the judge why this major clash matters. So if you're able to win this issue, so it's kind of like whipping again, but being more technical about it and not adding new responses to the debate. Yeah, so for example, if it's pragmatic, they promise this outcome but they don't get that outcome, or and then the last thing would be the outcome doesn't matter anyway. So that starts with contribution, responses, and the impact and the value of a contribution to the debate, right? The next structure is based, you nitpick the major issues or the major points of the other side. I do this when I am unsure of our strategy or unsure of the way we were able to deal with a lot of the material in the round, or if we are unsure of the new things that have come out. Okay. Um, so this does sound like responding a lot, but instead of introducing new responses, you just try to compare things against what already came out in the debate and proving why that was enough, right? So, for example, on opponent's major point one, you'll start with how they were able to prove it. So, what was the mechanism that they introduced, or what was the middle analysis that they used, or how did they demonstrate? What were the initial premises that led to their analysis? Then you must introduce why it's incomplete. So this one you can do a critique of it. I think this is okay. The reason why you can critique things is because a lot of the times judges also take things on face value. Like you don't have to call out an illogical argument for a judge to know it is illogical. But I think at reply as well, it is your chance to prove that something is illogical, or the process of getting to the conclusion doesn't make sense, or there's something missing. But you, while you're calling out the idea, you must also prove why a similar idea that came out from you guys does not fall into the same error. Okay. So the first part here is the you take the idea, you critique how the idea was explained, and then show why that matters to the idea. Does that mean they can't get that conclusion? But the second thing then you do is you illustrate how you were already able to actually deal with it. So even if this idea does make some sense, this is what we were able to say in comparison to it. And then I think it's important here to also flag which speaker it came from. So the intent of this structure really is to mitigate more a lot of the things that came out from the opponent. This is not a good position to be in, honestly. If you have to do this as your reply, that means that something went wrong in your initial strategy during prep. But the reason why I think this is still an important structure and should be in your toolbox is because things happen in the debate, shit happens. You can't always prep for everything. So at reply, you must note, are we winning the battle cry, or do I have to mitigate more in the defense? Because sometimes I think another reason why this becomes an important structure is sometimes both sides have really good battle cries, and the judge will find some difficulty resolving which is more important or relatively important. So when you're faced to deal with the opponent's major point head on, it gives credit to you guys more that yeah, in retrospect maybe the things that came out from their side weren't that important or weren't that well built anyway, so the judge is still likely to believe that by the merits, the other side is probably losing out. All right, the last structure that you guys can use is based on your battle cry. I usually do this when I'm confident that we're winning. So I just need to highlight to the judge because sometimes there's not much to respond to from the other side. So what are you gonna say at reply? I think the key thing that you have to do at reply then is highlight your strengths, right? So while in the third structure I usually do when I'm worried about our case. This one is that I usually do when the clashes weren't clear, so that's why I can't use the second structure, or the standards weren't really fulfilled by the other side. So this is an easy way out of just highlighting and widening the gap by showing the more important things that we were able to do in the debate. And it must be based on your battle cry. So, what were the main ideas that we wanted to champion, and how we were able to respond to those ideas later in the debate? Okay. So, while replies overall, you can't give new matter or new responses, you can always steer the judge to see the debate in a new lens. And that new lens is the one that makes you win. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thirsty. Okay, so all in all, I think reply speeches are an underappreciated art. And I think that's why there's a lecture about it, because there is an importance to it. If you're gonna, as a judge, if you're gonna listen to 8 minutes more of of two speeches, it must make some sense, right? If your government reply, um, it is a rule of thumb. You must adjust your government reply based on how op reply launches things, right? Because if op reply does have a lot of new material, then you should probably use the third structure and make sure that you deal with a lot of the new material by either weighing them off in the debate or trading them off, or explaining why already existing material was able to deal with that. But if your current reply and your up reply uses standards, I think it's also a good rule of thumb to use the same standards and try to counter the way that they were able to explain their things. There's so much advantage with being gov reply. That's why gov reply comes after op reply. Because while opposition has always the advantage and the expectation of more responses compared to government side, gov reply then has a lot to do, right? So I think the clear strategy really is to know what you need to do based on, is it us forwarding our battle cries or us reasserting the defensive strategy that already came out. Um, so I think a good reply speaker is one that listens a lot in the debate, but also tries to look at the debate through the lens of the judge. How will the judge eventually appreciate my reply speech? What are things that are unclear, right? The reason why I like the battle cry based structure, or even the first reply structure, is because I can highlight new things. So often in debate, there are bits and pieces that your team introduces. Like you introduce a policy at prime minister, and the whole debate, except obviously your own speakers, forgets the policy. And so that's really frustrating to prime ministers, because a lot of the case that will come out from your deputy and from your prime minister does rely on the premises that's set up in the policy. So if the clash and the responses all reply to something that was not dealt with already in the, I mean, was already dealt with in the policy, then at reply, you should highlight how the clash missed the existing policy that you guys already provided, right? Likewise, in reply, if you're up, you can comment on how they missed the clash. So usually prime ministers will try to be sneaky and will already introduce a defensive strategy. And the usually way that that happens is they'll say, at government this is what we believe in, at opposition they have to defend this. While a prime minister does always usually claim that op has to do something, at op you don't have to do that, right? Because you might have prepped a different strategy altogether. So when LO clashes and then deputy prime minister is gonna say, oh, they can't do that because we said they can't do that. At reply, you can't just let that go. You can, there are a lot of tricks that you can use. Like you can read the motion out loud and say, this is what we're allowed to do, in fact, or leader of opposition does have counter policy or counter fiat powers as much as the other side has. So the strength of your reply really is about using the technical rules of debate and the technical expectations and highlighting how you can or can't do something, in explaining different parts of the debate and how the judge will eventually look at it. So in all, I think in replies as well, it's not enough to just sell the ideas that you guys propose throughout the debate, because I think that's what every speaker is gonna do. What you must do then at reply is either highlight the technical stuff and why those technical stuffs matter. Like the reason why contribution analysis matters is because the strength of the conclusion or the ability to derive that conclusion does depend on the technical things that they should have established earlier on. Or if on the standard of responsiveness, them being unresponsive means our existing contribution does still stand in debate and should have a heavier weight in the ultimate judgment of the debate by the judge. Or you can say, we win that issue because we're the only ones who contributed to that issue. Or you can also highlight how you guys were very responsive to the different major points that came out from the other side, right? So it's really about highlighting the strategies that came out, but using the technical responses to do it and saying why the technical things that you're using are the more important things or the things that the judge should use to judge the debate. Okay. I hope that was clear for replies. If you have questions, you can input them now, and then I will answer them at the end of everything. Or yeah, you know what? I'll just answer them all at the end of everything. Okay, let's go to POIs. Um, POIs are so fun, honestly. There is a time that we used to fight over who gets to give a POI in my team, and it's always a comparison of who has better POI. So honestly, don't waste the opportunity to give a POI, or at least to stand. Yes, you must stand. Okay, so I'll first talk about POI etiquette. The reason why I think this is important is because it does get annoying. The amount of POIs people raise and the way that people respond to POIs does get annoying. Okay, so if you're giving a POI, you must follow the 15-second rule. So there are two ways that this applies is between raising a POI. Okay, like please count from when you were asked to sit down and then before raising another POI. That means that if your prime minister was denied giving a POI, that doesn't mean that the prime minister has to count 15 seconds and then you get to stand out as deputy. It means the whole team has to wait another 15 seconds before they can issue or raise or stand to offer another POI. Okay. The second thing is the length of a POI is only 15 seconds. So it's really up to you if you want to maximize your 15 seconds, but you can't talk more than that 15 seconds. Okay. As a rule of thumb, if the speaker can't understand your POI, then the judge will probably also not understand your POI. So don't talk fast and don't give 2 or more points. There was a time that we did used to like jam as many points as you can into a POI. I think this is useless and this is stupid because the judge will probably not note all the 3 things that you said. The debater probably won't note all of the 3 things that you said. But I think it's just disingenuous debating to try to cram things into 15 seconds and then expect the debater to drop everything that they had to say to be able to respond to every single one of your POIs. Okay, so yes, be nice about how you raise your POIs. Lastly, don't raise POIs just to confuse the speaker, okay? Sometimes you can like come up with some random piece of matter and then expect the debater to just deal with it. Honestly, like sometimes it's funny to watch, but it's just not nice. And some debaters who are not skilled enough will get derailed. Some will argue that them getting derailed is part of the fun of debating. I don't think it is. So as a rule of thumb, always make sure that your POIs are sensible and are about the root of the debate and have contribution to everyone's time. Yes. But if you're receiving a POI or you're the one speaking in front, really take at least one. And I would suggest that you take one at least maybe somewhere in your fourth minute rather than in your sixth minute. This gives you some time to. I think if you take it on the sixth minute, instead of wrapping up your debate or launching one last argument, you have to spend time dealing with a POI that you probably already could have dealt with earlier on in some point. So now you just have to repeat or you end up repeating something. I don't think in your last minute when you're trying to highlight and you're trying to meta everything, um, that dealing with a POI will it's just cumbersome, right? It just makes your speech messy. But the reason why I think it's important to take at least one, and I think I implore everyone, if you're old or if you're new as a debater, really just take one POI. Unless you have a lot to say, honestly. Like if you're ranting through your whole speech and you really have a lot to cover, then maybe like it's okay not to take a POI if you're already very responsive. But by default, I would suggest that you do, especially if you're a new speaker. I think it does develop your ability to think fast and think on your literally on your feet. So really take one. If you're more gutsy, take one from who you think is the strongest speaker in the team. At least that way, it just shows more confidence and like you know your shit. Okay. The 15-second rule also applies to you. So you must not interrupt the speaker until their 15 seconds is up. Sometimes debaters are like, ah, yeah, I already get your point. But like, what if you don't? And you probably don't because they're not finished yet. Okay. So the only time you interrupt the POI is after the 15 minutes. And you can literally count in front of them. Like, just, I mean, not loudly, but like you can just show them your fingers and count so that you're timing them, right? That is okay. But as long as you give them their full to explain their POI. This whole I will answer that POI later. If you don't know, then just don't deal with it at all. Just say like my next speaker will deal with. Honestly, like just don't because the judge will remember that you promised to answer a POI, but you didn't. So if you say that I will answer that later, make sure you flag it and you say that's where I'm answering it. Okay. Next slide. So raising POIs, I would really so this part is divided into two. Okay, there's one about raising POIs and there's one about taking and answering POIs. I'll deal most with raising POIs and what strategies you can use when you're raising a POI. So always try to raise a POI. I think an important part of debating is really the show of force. So fake it till you make it. Even if you don't have a POI, just stand. Like there are times that I have gotten caught just standing and I just have to think of something on my feet. Sometimes we just stand and then we think while we're standing. But it's really important to just look like you're invested in the debate because that's when you're less likely to lose. So honestly, that's just psychology, right? Wow. When you're invested in the debate and when you look like you care about the debate, everyone else is also likely to believe that you deserve to win. But if you're so quiet or you're not even standing, you're not even making reactions with your face, then you're more likely to lose the debate. So that doesn't mean you should be noisy. So there's some people who are like point, 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 or like yeah. So you can just stand, make an angry face or whatever. Just be as quiet as possible and be respectful. And again, observe the 15-second rule. As a rule of thumb, our teams usually it's the member that doesn't speak next, right? So if leader of opposition is speaking right now, the ones who usually raise the POIs are the whips or the prime minister because they're already done speaking. Unless like you're a ballsy deputy or there's something part of your strategy. The reason why we do this is because you're probably preparing for your speech or you're listening for responses, and standing up does waste time for you. So it's better that you focus on your speech and focus on listening and responding when you're the next speaker. Okay. Once a POI has been launched, it doesn't. You shouldn't just leave it there. So, for example, Prime Minister raises a POI against leader of opposition. At DPM, it is important that you bring it back and you talk about that issue or you talk about that POI, right? So that's how you bring it back and you utilize that 15 seconds. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna now talk about strategies for POIs. What type of POI you can raise to a certain speaker. So if you're raising POIs to a first speaker, I honestly think that you can prep these POIs as during prep time. The main type that we prep during prep time are clarificatory POIs. So the goal of these POIs are to set traps that the team would be forced to defend towards the end. This could be exclusions and inclusions of the policy. So, for example, they're outlining these are the things that we're gonna do. Then you ask, will you also do this, or what do you think about this other thing? For example, if like you can ask like, does this include old people, right? So the reason why that does matter is if the way that they respond to that does affect their principled consistency or will eventually affect the effectiveness of their policy. So for example, in the debate about community quarantine, you'll say that we're only going to quarantine old people because they're susceptible. Then you're going to make a POI. But what about young people who can be asymptomatic and will still spread the virus? So that clarification on what is excluded and included does fall into a trap the effective affects the effectiveness of the policy or the consistency of the goal to reduce the spread, right? Um, the next type part of clarifications are extents. So while the first is who are included, what do you also include in doing? The second part is about what they're willing to risk able to achieve this, right? So does that mean you're also willing to torture XYZ, an emotion about torture? Or does that mean that you're also willing to spend this? So pushing the principled extent of it. So for example, um, in a debate about scarce medical resources and we need to prioritize the majority, then your POI could probably be along the lines of, will you also harvest the organs of terminally ill people so that we can save the majority, right? So that does question the extent of a principle and how consistent a team will be able to be. At the end, I wrote here that usually your questions to the first speakers your POIs are usually in question form. The reason for this is because you have time later on to build on it as the succeeding speakers. A question, I think, concessions that they probably didn't plan to make. Okay, so these are strategies that you must think about in prep, especially against leader of opposition and prime minister already. The second type of POI that you can run or raise are defenses. So this is a lot aligned with your defense strategies. This is important because this is where you start mitigating the important points, right? Or you force your comparatives. Um, yeah. So when they're introducing a principle, you start asking, but is this principle worth this death, right? Or is this principle worth the certainty of the harms that happen here? So it's kind of similar to the extent, but again, because our defense strategies, as I talked about earlier, the key point is to make sure we make sure we downplay the value of their points. The POI can already start doing that. Okay. Honestly, what I usually utilize is clarifications by 1 minute stand up against PM or LO and already have have a POI about the policy prepared. Like that's really a baseline thing that you can do at that, and it makes you look prepared and makes you look more confident in it. Okay. So next is raising that POIs to deputy. there's a lot of strategy as well to how we determine what type of POI is gonna be raised. That's why I placed here that POI should depend on how deputies adjust the case, so their existing case to the speaker before them, right? So that means at DPM, obviously, Prime Minister's case and the way that you rebuild Prime Minister's case will depend on how leader of opposition clashed and how leader of opposition argued in the debate. So usually, it'll go back to the main strategies that we talked about earlier. Deputy strategy could push the battle cry, or deputy strategy could be more defensive. So an example of pushing the battle cry is they will say that their outcome actually also leads to co-opting your goal. Later on, there's an example for this. So for example, in the motion, this house believes that economic sanctions have done more harm than good. Economic sanctions against authoritarian regimes have done more harm than good. Opposition might argue that this leads to people revolting more. It'll lead to more revolts, so that's why it is good. You will say that the way that you can co-opt this at the other side would be to just try to argue that there's a different way to achieve that end goal, right? That will reduce the capacity for the regime. So your POI will be focusing not on will they be able to co-opt the goal, but rather could focus on how they are able to achieve that goal. Because if they're trying to co-opt a lot of your benefits, the chances are they're gonna say that some things are worth the risk or worth the trade-off. So it's really up to you to try to say, no, that's not worth it. And that's what you can do in the POI, question that extent or the cost. But if the deputy strategy is to be defensive, so for example, they can claim that your outcome is unlikely, what you can start highlighting here are nuances, right? Or you can just trade it off. That fine, it might be unlikely, but the harm and the damage that will be accrued, even if it is unlikely, is just not worth the risk, right? So that's the value and the impact of what is being raised. So these POIs do sound like responses, and the reason for that is because it must be utilized by the speakers that come out after, okay? Or if a deputy strategy is to claim that your principles don't matter, then you can also question the extent and the cost of violating that principle and why that's not worth it. Right. So again, this goes back to the initial strategy that you prep in highlighting either your battle cries or highlighting the defensive strategies that you prep. Okay, last, raising POIs to whips. Now is your last chance because it's the last speaker, and this is the only time that you'll be able to highlight something. Because I really hate it when whips don't take POIs because, I have a strategy in mind, okay? Or if people don't raise POIs to whips, it's really such a missed opportunity. So the question that you ask when the whip comes up is, what should we prioritize from our case? So it's either you highlight or bring back something that you already mentioned in the POI. So for example, you can highlight the battle cry. But a lot of the times, the way that debaters highlight their battle cries is, oh, you didn't respond to this idea. That doesn't do anything. In fact, it tells the debate the whip that then yeah, I should respond to that idea, right? So that really doesn't do anything for you. It in fact gives the whip more opportunity to do something. So what you can do instead, highlight something else. In highlighting, rather, you just be more comparative about the impact of what you were able to prove. So you can do this by, because your team was not able to respond to this idea, even though you promise this thing, you still haven't weighed it off against ours. Why is that worth the risk? Stuff like that. So that puts it more in a strategic intent, which is like trading it off or having to weigh it off. But it also shows the judges that the other speakers that came before the whip can be penalized for not being as responsive to that idea yet. But the reason why it's important to bring out the impacts is because you're not just handing it freely to the whip, but you're gonna have to make them work for it by telling them, on this standard, this battle cry that we launched that was unresponded to still matters in this debate in comparison to what you are presenting or your team has presented. Okay. So really, and that's where it becomes more strategic because it's based on the standard, it's based on an impact rather than you just tell them, oh, you didn't respond to this. Okay. Or you want to highlight a defensive strategy. So here you just trade it off from the start in your POI. Like, oh, we already dealt with that. We said that that doesn't matter because this is what the cost is, or this is the risk that you're taking. Why is that still worth it? Okay. So as a team, while the whips are speaking, you should align yourselves. Like, guys, what should we do? What should we prioritize? And it really depends on how well the other team is doing and how well you were able to explain your side. The same assessment strategies that you can use at Reply, I think, will work for how you raise POIs at WIP. Okay. All right, so some examples. In the motion, this House believes that unconditional direct cash transfers to the poor people are preferable, blah, blah, blah. So this debate is obviously about how we help the poor. Is it based on cash or welfare in kind? So I think that Prime Minister would probably launch is we need flexibility because people only people know what they truly need. So a way that you can be funny and snarky about about POIs is this POI, like, but do people need drugs and alcohol? So that does allude that the eventual case that you will launch at opposition is one related to what if people use their cash to buy drugs and alcohol? Okay. So that does put government at a difficult position because now they have to think about, does the unconditional part of the motion really do help them, or is easier for them and all that. Yes. At op though, so op might run the idea that people are not fit to make decisions on their own. At gov, your POI could be attacking how governments are still also made up of people that might still have the same problem, but you can also bring it back to your initial win, which is only people know empirically what they need. Yeah, fine, they might need alcohol because they're stressed, right? So that was why they're fit to make their own decisions. Hold on. Okay. Another example in the motion believes that the imposition of broad economic sanctions. Yeah, I flagged this earlier. So Gov might say it becomes a breeding ground for more support for authoritarian regimes because they can control the media's narrative. Then you can just say, so this is so there are four things that I noted here. You can either show uh, unlikeliness of a claim as a POI, or you can create the defensive strategy as a POI, which is the on the rapid increase in suffering, or you can trade off certain ideas, or you can bring back your winning point, your battle cry, right? So people lose faith in the capacity of the regime. So you can just say na people will just blame the international community. So you don't actually lose faith in the regime. You just lose faith in the capacity of the international regime to help you out. Okay. So really be creative with your POIs when you're issuing them. I think you must keep trying. There are bad POIs, honestly, but you should at least try. And you must be understandable when you raise up POIs. Like bad POIs are really those that have no strategic intent. You're just asking a question. So it must always tie back to something that you prep and how you want to position and highlight the things that you were saying in debate. I think POIs also lead to helping your reply speakers because it aligns the strategy. Are we being defensive or are we winning on a battle cry? So you really must assess what we should do. Honestly, a mix of everything for each of the speakers. Like against Prime Minister, you'll raise something that is more clarificatory but will lead into a trap. So that already helps out your leader of opposition by pointing it out. Against Deputy, you'll probably bring up a defensive strategy and question their attempt at raising a principle. Or then at whip, you're gonna raise one that highlights your win condition or your battle cry already, right? So it's really just using a mix of all of those things to be able to strategically use your POIs. Okay. The last part is answering POIs. So I have a shortcut for TPA. think, process, and answer. Okay, so you must again answer at least one. I suggest around the fourth minute. You must maintain grace under pressure. I know it's scary to answer POIs, but you don't must not look frazzled or don't look clueless. Don't look to your teammates. Like fine, maybe you can look to your teammates, but like don't have this shocked expression on your face or like you must look like, that POI made no sense, right? So if you didn't understand it, then just be like, yeah, you know what, that didn't make sense. So always look confident, right? I think debate is a lot about confidence. Okay, first, think. So you must understand the intent of the POI. I already told you what different POIs would probably entail and their strategy. So if you're the one answering, you have to note, does it align to that I know? Is it a defense? Is it a battle cry? Are they making a trade off? Are they highlighting something? Or are they just distracting me and throwing something totally random? So obviously, if it's something totally random, then don't deal with it, right? But I think you need to understand why they're giving a POI to be better able to respond to the POI later on. The second thing is based on the intent that you have abstracted, where does it belong in my speech? So depending on where you are in your speech and what strategy you're already executing at your speech, you can either say that I have already dealt with this or I'm still gonna deal with this. So that's how you make the promise that I'll deal with this later and then actually fulfill that promise because you aligned it with the strategy, because you understood the intent of the POI and you understand the content of the strategy you prep as a team, right? Could also not matter. Yeah, so always remember that while sometimes it doesn't belong in your speech, the POI really might not also just belong in the speech. It might just not matter at all. Okay. So last is answering and dealing with the POI. It's really important to always answer it with your strategy in mind. If you start rambling on about your POI, about the POI that was raised, think like, is this helping my strategy or is it helping me forward my case or is it at least giving me some defensive mechanism against the thing that's coming out in the speech? Because if it doesn't do that, then don't answer the POI or don't deal with it the way that you instinctively want to deal with it. Okay. If the POI is an unexplained metaphor, so this something happens, or a parallel, you don't have to deal with it right away. You can say until you're able to explain the relevance of that metaphor or of that parallel, that has no weight in this debate. So that's because you probably will end up spending time trying to understand the intent of the POI, but you don't have so much time to just do the mental gymnastics for the other team. So you might as well just wave it aside and say it's not relevant or there's something that I don't want to deal with, right? So tips for answering POIs: don't spend too much time on a POI. The goal is to get over it, right? So if they only have 15 seconds to explain it, take 15 seconds to answer it or integrate it. That's why it's important to understand where it fits into your speech. Some people end up spending a minute answering a POI. That's really not smart use of your time, and you actually take away time from investing in your strategy or investing in the arguments that you have prepped. Which is why I think it's important to take the POI around the fourth minute and not around six, because then you would end up spending time on something that wasn't important. And at least if you take it in the fourth minute, you will be forced to compress your answer so that you can get moving with the rest of your speech. All right. If you don't understand a POI, the first strategy that you can use is, so this is at worst, okay? Like at worst, you don't understand the POI. Just grab any word, any big word, or any word that they stressed and explain something related to that POI or related to that word rather. And then you might actually even convince the judge that, yeah, that's what the POI is about, even though that's really not what the POI is about and nobody understood it. Or just say it doesn't make sense. And the way that you do this is not by saying, oh, I don't understand your POI, or by asking, oh, come again, or ask them to say their POI again. What you just can do is like, you know what, that POI doesn't make sense. And just pray for a Hail Mary that maybe it just also didn't make sense to the judge, right? So these are your worst case scenarios. Honestly, the first one is you fake it till you make it, which is you just grab a word, spend 15 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds talking. Okay. Yeah, that is it for my lecture. Okay. I will now be answering Q&As. Answering questions. Yes. Is there anything that was unclear in my lecture about strategy, replies, and questions? Thank you for making it this far in the lecture. Okay, how should judges appreciate credit the impact of the replies to the debate? What do you mean how? I mean they should yeah, they should appreciate or credit the impact of replies. I think replies really matter in one, determining the margin, and two, determining the value of the case as a whole relative to everything. Because what I think whip teachers will focus on dealing with the material and responding to the material. I think it's the replies who package the material better. So I think as a judge, you can be compelled to believe the things that the reply is packaging or the way that reply is selling the case, or not believe it at all because sometimes their replies are going to lie to you. But I really think it's important to take into consideration the things that come out of reply, because the scale can tip over depending on how good the reply speech was. A lot of new analysis, I mean, new perspectives does come out, especially if you become more technical with it. So honestly, as a judge, you can take it in consideration. It's not something you just ignore. Okay. Yes. How do we respond to damned if you do, damned if you don't POIs? Ah, if you have an example, like I would totally, I think it's really case to case, yung mga damned if you do and damned if you don't POIs. I think one, it's good that you know if a POI is damned if you do or damned if you don't. I think the best strategy is to, um, again, as the thought process, the think process on answer, in the process, does it fit into the general strategy of your team? Okay. Um, Based on your battle cry. So the damned if you do means that you might as well not, there's something that you must not compromise. You must not compromise your battle cry, right? Because that's what you're gonna win at all costs. So if you respond to that POI, make sure that the way you're responding to it is one that does not damage your core strategy. But if you end up fumbling it and making that mistake, it is important that all your teammates stick by it and just readjust the case afterwards and adjust the defensive strategy, right? A team being you can make mistakes talaga in a debate, but it's really about how you recover and how consistent you will remain after that. Okay, so don't be scared about damned if you do and damned if you don't POIs. Just fake it till you make it, but always stick to the strategy and how to mitigate that damage more. Sometimes just say that the POI doesn't make sense. You know what? Maybe that could be an option depending on what the POI is. Okay, thank you, Jelarmy. Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced that right. Okay, Rafi, do you think reply speeches can change the outcome of the round? If so, to what extent? Yeah, I totally think it can. So sometimes the debates are won on point 0.5 margins, and that's really because of the reply. But I think how it can is, I mean, because the speaker score of a reply is divided by two. So, if, let's say, by the end of the whip speeches, one side is winning by 1 point, a whip speech can be 1.5 points better than the other team. So you end up winning by 0.5, right? I think the extent a reply speech can win a debate is really just dependent on what things got highlighted and how they were highlighted. So as a judge, you need to assess, does it sell to me an idea that, or does it sell to me a standard that I can reasonably believe and reasonably use? So I really think the strategy of the reply is highlighting via technical responses the things and the materials already came out in the debate. Yeah, so I do think they can win and change the outcome of the debate, especially if, as a reply, as I mentioned earlier, one of the strategies can be highlighting nuggets of information that your team brought out that was not responded to, but then you can impact as to why that's important or why it was proven to be important already earlier on. So at that point, the judge is forced to remember something that they didn't initially remember because it wasn't responded to, right? Sometimes some judges will judge the debate with like, I didn't buy that idea because nobody responded to it. Like, it's really not the fault of the person who proposed the idea. if it doesn't get responded to. So at reply, you must highlight it and say that, it's not our fault they didn't respond to it. It's still relevant. So by that technicalness of the debate, you can explain why it is relevant and why not responding to it is not our fault but their fault. So it does change the outcome because it does highlight important battle cry strategies that you already came up with earlier on. Okay. Um, Thank you, Rafi. Rimari Brioso. Hello. What are various drills and practices that debaters can do to work on on their POIs more besides debate rounds? Honestly, you just need to think fast. POIs are really about being witty. So I think one thing that you can do is just your mentality is really why is this wrong? I teach this to every debater I encounter, like why is this idea wrong? Like, why the fuck is it wrong? So I think that's one important drill. It's really the mentality and changing your mentality. So instead of accepting things as like, oh, you know what, that sounds true, your mentality must be, why is that wrong? Or like, that's wrong. And then I'll find out why, right? So it's really adjusting your mentality. But I think the other way that you can practice POIs is asking questions. A POI really starts with a good question, honestly. So you just ask yourself, why are things the way that they are? I think debate, though, is a lifestyle. It doesn't just happen in debate, but it also happens in the real world. Like, why is an advertisement that advertisement? Why is the news saying what the news is saying? So those are things that are like POIs already. Like the mere act of questioning puts people in a position that they have to defend against the question that you just launched. So I think those are clear drills and practices. Or if you're watching the debate round or if you're case building, really just poke holes at your own case and deal with it there, right? Because the holes that you start poking in your own case will probably be also the same holes that the other side will start poking on your case by POIs. Yes. But really, the same bone that grows from responses and practicing responses, I think, is the same thing that will help with POIs. Yes, but you can't win on POIs alone. Okay, like it really has to be your strategy and how well you utilize your POIs. So while it is important to practice POIs, I think the more important thing to practice is creating a good case and executing a good strategy. Yes. Other questions? Thank you for that question. Um, yes. I hope you guys learn a bunch or some things or some tricks up your sleeve. Um, if you're a speaker, so there's some like bad things that I learned as early as high school from all the lecture videos that I watched. Like I saw one that um the tip was if someone is raising a POI, don't tell them to sit down. Just keep them standing because the more time they spend standing is less time they spend writing down something that you're saying. And I was like, that's such a dick move, but it makes sense, right? So that also had led me to police myself. If the speaker doesn't tell me to sit down, I'll just sit down because I'm wasting time. I could be writing. Um, Honestly, distracting POIs are so annoying. So sometimes, like, it is tempting to just throw in a POI that makes no sense at all and hope the debater takes the bait and explains something useless. But really, just like, let's make debate better, okay? So no more dick move things. I don't think there are any other questions. Um, if anything, I think the main takeaway from this lecture is strategy, right? Because your reply and your PI will just depend on the strategy of your team. Oh, another. How do you deal with debaters who use POIs to distract? How do I deal with the debaters or how do I deal with the POI? I think no, I mean, dealing with the POI is really saying it's useless. If it's distracting, just say like this POI makes no sense. Um, but with the debater, I don't know. You can talk to them after and tell or ask them why the POI made sense or what was the intent of their POI, just so that you confront them with their own stupidity, right? And then, I mean, I don't think they'll be forced to say like, oh, you're just trying to distract you, unless like that's just their personality. But honestly, they'll probably not confess to that, and then that puts them in an uncomfortable position. So if you feel like a POI was just meant to distract them, after the round, talk to them about it, and it's like, oh, what did you mean by this POI? I didn't really understand it, right? So don't be ashamed. In the words of TGP, the generics pharmacy, wag mahiyang magtanong, may generic ba nito? Right? Thank you. Sarah, what are common mistakes that debaters should avoid in raising POIs? A POI is not a telenovela. It's only 15 seconds. Honestly, just say something short and concise. And yeah, really just don't spend so much time raising your POI. It really has to be understandable. So I think that's one common mistake. The second common mistake is a POI is not an explicit response. So while it can be, but you just don't have enough time to make a POI um, very cohesive to effectively be a response. That's why it must be brought back. And that's why to whips, if you don't have any chance to respond to op whip, for example, your response, your POI must be bringing back something already rather than questioning something or being a clear response, because there's no chance for you to bring that idea back. At least what you can do is derail or to segue into something that's more important, which is what you're trying to highlight. I think one last mistake that people make with POIs is by not raising them. Honestly, um, if you don't raise a POI, it does remove a lot of the fun of debating. So really utilize the raising POIs. It's really fun to raise POIs and to try to think of creative POIs as well. I think that's really the common mistakes that I can think of off the top of my head. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Um, what if you have multiple questions that you want to point out, and should there only just be one question? And yes, I really suggest there should only be one question, honestly. What we do is, if we have multiple ideas that we want to raise at the same time, there's usually sometimes a way to merge it. Okay. So try to think about how you can merge the two ideas. If that doesn't work, prioritize based on the strategy, right? But our usual instinct is really to try to merge the two questions together to make it just one question. So instead of making it a question, maybe you can convert one part of it to a statement, and then you still utilize the question of the other side. So, for example, if one question is a premise related question, you can convert that question into an assumed premise that you will assert to be true in the POI, right? So, if something, 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 why is something, 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 right? So, the first part is still the premise related part, but you're assuming it to be true, but the question part comes out in the second, right? So that's how you can probably merge the two ideas and make it work. That's usually something that we definitely do. If not, we just avoid it. Especially if, like me and my partner, we have different POIs. We try to. Our first instinct is who is the most creative POI that we can replan around, right? So when you have two questions, kasi I'm sure one question is more important, but that does not mean the other question is not important at all. So what you can do is rethink the core question while take into consideration the other question, right? Hope that makes sense. Again, UIs are about creativity, so utilize it. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Hmm. There was another mistake that I was trying to thinking of earlier. I just don't remember. Yeah. Other questions, guys? Thank you for watching. I don't know how long I have to keep this up if there are no questions. Maybe until like 4:20. 4:20. I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. I hope you guys learned a lot. Um, Honestly, racing POIs are really fun. I really get sad if people don't get my POIs because I made so much effort into putting into my POIs. I mean that's scary. Honestly, like I'm scared to get some people's POIs. So I'm sure like some people are scared to get my POIs. But it hurts. It hurts my feelings. But that's just petty, honestly. Because sometimes I don't get POIs at all, so I can't blame people for not getting POIs. But honestly, let's all just take POIs if we can. Okay. Um, Other things to note. Always bring back your POI, yeah, guys. Like, okay. So there's I already answered this question. This what practices you can improve in PUIs. I'll answer it again. You probably didn't hear it. What I said earlier was it's really about your mentality because PUIs should really be about questioning first what is being said. So one practice is really questioning everything around you. I think this is an important skill not just for POIs but also for debates. So like if you're watching TV, ask yourself, why is that the way that is, or why did you choose that? Okay, or if you're talking to someone, just really think why. Like, but what about this, right? So I think that's one key practice. It's really changing your mentality. Your mentality should in a debate should always be why is that wrong? If it's not wrong or if you can't find a reason why that's wrong, just find the reason why it helps you instead of goes against you, right? So why is that not wrong, but why does that help me instead? Can be your mentality. So it's really a change in mentality. A clear practice is really thinking fast. POIs are really an exercise of how fast your brain can think, really. So if you're case building and if you're prepping or if you're creating a strategy, just try asking questions about your own strategy. Poke holes at it. Because again, as I said earlier, the holes that you poke will probably also be the same holes they'll try to poke on the other side. So that's really, you don't have to go against someone to raise POIs. You can also go against yourself, honestly. Yes. Thank you for that question. Another question. What can be a strategic way your two other partners can help you prep for your reply speech after they've finished their speeches? Ah, really believe that if you're not speaking anymore in the round, you are the ears and the brain, second brain for your teammates. Because, the saying, two heads are better than one, right? Because the person who's going to write the reply is obviously going to be focused on taking notes and thinking of responses, that they're not actively listening. They're only passively listening to the speaker right before them. So I think the two partners must filter things that are coming out from the current speaker, assess it based on the strategy and is it and the value of that idea, and then feed it to the reply speaker or feed it to the whip speaker. Okay, so that if the reply speaker comes asks you what did they just say, the other teammates must already have an answer. They said this is what you can say about it. Okay, um just because you're done speaking doesn't mean you're done with the debate. You must keep making POIs and you must keep feeding the other teammates. It's really about you're the active listener now and you're the active thinker. You don't have to write it down. You just have to pass it over and assess. And honestly, I've had teammates who just when I ask them like, "Oh, what did they just say?" They're like, I don't know." So I'm like, "Oh, okay, I don't know about you too." And then you fake it till you make it, right? Because honestly, so teamwork makes the dream work. Okay. Yes, I hope I answered that question. Really, they're the ears and the filters, and then they'll just pass it on to the reply speaker, and then the reply speaker will decide does it fit into the strategy. Actually, no. Like the ones listening must think if it fits into the strategy already. It's a reply speaker who then assesses it finally into the general theme of their speech. Yes. Thank you, Hannah. Marmalade. what if they raise a POI against your policy, but it's already late? Mistakes that I was thinking of earlier. So one of the mistakes is people get attached to a POI that that should have been asked at the first minute, but and while the speech already progresses, it changes whole idea. It's already at the fifth minute, but you're still gonna raise a POI about something that came out in the first minute. That's honestly unstrategic because the judge and the speaker won't understand where you're coming from. But if you're gonna spend time recapping what they said, like, oh, earlier you said this. This is the POI that I want to raise. You're wasting time explaining what they said and not executing a POI. So really, your POI should be real time based. They must keep evolving to what the speaker is talking about already at that point in time. Okay, so active listening. So if it's really against your policy at the end of the round or towards the whip, um, I think what whips and deputies can do is just to say that they can't complain about our policy anymore. Or at least you can just re-clarify it na lang at worst. Just say na if it's a exclusion question or inclusion or an extends question, um, you can just answer it. Because honestly, like sometimes though things do become unclear from the policy as the next speakers come up because they might readjust the strategy. So you can make a POI about what really is the policy. Um, but if it's just like a challenge of the policy, obviously they can't do that. Would it be your fault for not clarifying in PM? I mean, yeah, it's kind of your fault for not clarifying it in PM because it maybe should have been something that was flagged. But honestly, it's mostly the other side's fault for not raising the POI earlier. Or it could also be your fault for not taking the POI, but it could also be their fault for not responding to it when they had the chance earlier in the debate. Like LO didn't respond to PM's policy, or DPM did not respond to to LO's policy, something like that. So it really depends, I guess. I don't have a definite answer. So it really just again think process answer. Is it aligned with our strategy? What is the intent of this POI in the general scheme of our case? Yeah, I think that's just assess it. Okay. It depends on the case, I think. That's my final answer. It depends. Locking that in. Okay, thank you for that question. Other questions? Well, I have passed 420. And there's still people on the screen. So are you all just watching me and not doing anything? Um, 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 um. Hey, so I'm planning to release another. So I'm gonna make a shameless vlog now that you guys are here. So if you follow me on Twitter, if you don't follow me on Twitter, just find me somehow. I won't plug it in. That's kind of. I'm gonna make a new tarot reading video. So I also read tarot on the side. That's why Kitty earlier asked on when do the tarot cards come out. When does the tarot readings come out? Unfortunately, not in this video. I'm not gonna hijack BD, but I might. And someday I might hijack BD. But yeah, so on my Twitter, I'm gonna launch a new one soon. I already videoed most of it. So if you guys are interested, or you have nothing else to do, maybe you want to watch it. Like support a struggling artist. Wow, artist. Ayun. You guys have other questions before I log out and allow, allow Aloy to take the stage. So next speaker is Aloy. Um, he is he is white and half Filipino. Um, he's gonna talk about judging and appreciating replies. So like I earlier, Kyle asked what judges should do about replies. I think Aloy will cover that. If he doesn't, then you should call him out for that. Yes. Okay, I have hit the 130 mark. I guess that's it, guys. Thank you for watching me. Wow, watching me. Thank you for spending your afternoon with me. I hope you guys learned. If you have any other questions, honestly, just don't be afraid to reach out to your coach. Sure. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned a lot, I hope at least like your takeaway is also on strategy and creating a good case. I would like to hear about that, honestly. Like, if you have violent reactions and if you have comments, if you're angry, if you don't agree with anything that I said, that's totally okay. We can talk about it. You can rant about it on Twitter. Make sure to tag me, and so that I can also defend and weigh in on it. I might have made a mistake, and then we're also people, right? But I really hope you guys learn. And yes, so that is it. Like and subscribe. I don't know. Kitty also said the same thing yesterday. Yeah, thank you for watching this video. And thank you to PDU for this initiative. I hope you guys are all safe if you're watching this from home. You're probably watching this from home. Really take care, everyone. Let's hope that this curve flattens sooner than later. I hope our government will get their shit together. But based on last night, um, meat more so hot dog as fuck. Pero thoughts and prayers. As long as we're all gonna try to do our part. So I guess let's just keep each other safe. If our leaders don't want to keep us safe, and help people as well as much as you can. Let's help each other. Yep. Okay. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching.